Hi everybody, we're looking here in this video on fractions. We're going to look at adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing, looking at all the basics of fractions that you need to know. Definitely for foundation, but also good to recap for the higher students as well. So let's just quickly dive into the first part. Write as a mixed number in its simplest form. So first thing you need to understand what a mixed number is. So it would be a number, so 2 for example, and then a fraction. So 2.5 is a mixed number. 5 1/3 is a mixed number. So how do I go from 13 over 8 to a mixed number? Well, you look at how many times does 8 go into 13. So I know that 8 goes into 13 once. So that's how I get my big 1. And then what's left over? So to go from 8 to 13, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, there are 5 left over. And it becomes 5 over 8. So the denominator here will stay the same. So if you want to practice, pause the video, have a go at this second one then. And then I'll go through it. So thinking about how do you go from 5 to 17, how many times does 5 go into 17? And hopefully you can realise that that's 3, because 5 times 3 is 15. How do I go from 15 to 17? There are 2 left over, so it becomes 2 over 5. So that's how you go from a mixed number, from an improper fraction being a top-heavy one, to a mixed number. Now, let's look at how that works later on when we're actually solving problems. But let's first of all look at adding some fractions in these bottom questions here. So work out 3 over 5 plus 2 over 3. Problem here, the denominators aren't the same, so you need to make the denominators the same. Okay, so if you are ever stuck, if you're not sure what to multiply them by, just multiply it by the opposite denominator. So in this case here, I multiply this fraction, the whole fraction, by 3, because that's the opposite there. And then I multiply this whole fraction by 5, because that's the opposite there. So by doing that, you do 3 times 3, and you do 3 times 5, and you do 5 times 2, and 5 times 3. So whatever you do to the bottom, you must do to the top. So this fraction here becomes 9 over 15. 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 5 is 15. And the second fraction here becomes 2 times 5, which is 10, and then 5 times 3, which is 15. So this fraction becomes that, and you can see the bottoms are now the same. From here, if the bottoms are the same, you just add the tops. So that becomes 19, and the bottom stays the same as 19 over 15. Now, good habit to get into is to turning that back into a mixed number. So how many times does 15 go into 19? Is once. And then from 15 to 19, there are 4 left over. So it becomes 4 over 15. Get in the habit of that and just double check if that fraction can be simplified. Try and simplify it. I know that there's nothing that goes into 4 and 15, so I can't simplify it. Okay, so let's look at this next example on the right here. I've got mixed numbers now. So how do I do it with mixed numbers? There are a couple of ways, but the way I'm going to explain is that first of all, we convert them into improper fractions. So if you have a mixed number here, like 2 1/4 is a mixed number, turn it into an improper fraction. So what you do is you do 2 times by the 4, and then you add the top number, so the numerator on. So 2 times 4 is 8, plus your 1 gives you 9. So you end up with 9, and the denominator stays the same, over 4. So maybe have a quick pause of the video and practice, see if you can convert this one into an improper fraction. Pause the video if you need to, and then I'll go for it. So what you do is you do 3 times by 3, and then add the 1, or 3 times 3 is 9, plus the 1 gives you 10, so this becomes 10 over 3. Now what we've got is something that looks like what we had over here. And we go back to the same process. We must make the bottoms the same. So I times this one by 3, and I times this one by 4. If you're not sure, just multiply it by the opposite denominator. Remember, you do 3 times the top and 3 times the bottom, so this becomes 27 over 12. And the same thing here, 4 times your 10, which is 40, and 4 times your 3, which is 12. Bottoms are now the same, so leave that as 12, and then add the tops, so that becomes 67 over 12. And then what you're trying to work out, that is now currently an improper fraction. The top is heavier than the bottom. So think to yourself, how many times does 12 go into 67? So if you do your 12 times tables, 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72. That's too many times. So I have to stop there, which is 5. And then how do I go from 60 to 67? There are 7 left over out of 12. And that would be your final answer. So if you want to pause the video, have a go at these bottom two. Subtracting is exactly the same. So remember, when you are adding fractions, you make the bottoms the same. When you're subtracting fractions, you make the bottoms the same as well. So have a go at these bottom two if you want to. Pause the video and I'll go through them in a sec. Okay, so this one here, 15 is at the bottom. Now, technically, I can just leave that as 15 because I can get the bottom of this right-hand one to 15. So I can actually just times this one by 3 to save myself a lot of aggravation. I leave that as 8 over 15. And then I do 2 times 3, which is 6. And then 5 times 3, which is 15. And now the bottoms are the same. Then, bottom's the same, so keep it as 15. 8 minus 6 is 2. So 2 over 15 is your answer there. Let's look at the second one on the right-hand side here. So you need to turn them to improper fractions first of all. So 7 times 2, and then add the top. And you should be doing 2 times 5, and then add the top. 7 times 2 is 14. So let's looking at this left one now. 7 times 2 is 14, plus the 1 gives you 15. So that becomes 15 over 2. And then 2 times 5 is 10, plus your 1 is 11. So this becomes 11 over 5. Again, remember you need to make the bottoms the same. So how do I get them both to the same number at the bottom? If you're stuck, just multiply it by the opposite denominator. So I'm going to multiply that left one by 5. And I'm going to multiply this right one by 2. So 15 times 5, well 10 times 5 is 50. 5 times 5 is 25, so it becomes 75 over 10. Minus 22. 2 times 11 is 22. And then 2 times 5, which is 10. So then you're doing 75 minus 22. So 75 minus 20 would be 55. Then minus 2 is 53. So it becomes 53 over 10. And then how do you turn that into a mixed number? Well, 10 goes into 53 5 times with 3 over 10 left over. Okay, so that's your adding and subtracting fractions. The next bit we're going to look at multiplying and dividing. Okay, so in the next part of this video, we're going to look at multiplying and dividing with fractions. So let's just quickly have a look at our first point. The thing we need to do first of all is just multiply fractions is really easy. Times the top by the top, times the bottom by the bottom. So 4 times 3 is 12, 7 times 10 is 70. So multiplying fractions is the easiest one of them all. You do top times top, bottom times bottom, and then simplify your answer if you can. So technically, if you wanted to then simplify this, I know that they both divide by 2, so you could go 6 over 35, and obviously see if you can go any smaller than that as well. If we look at this next example, a little bit harder because we've got mixed numbers involved. So we go through the process we did before. Big number times the bottom number and add the top. So 3 times 2 is 6, plus the 1 at the top is 7, so it becomes 7 over 2. And then 2 times 3 is 6, add the top, so we end up with 7 over 3 here. Then you put your time sign back in, and we go through the steps we've just done. Top times top, bottom times bottom, so we end up with 49 over 6 in this case. Now, thinking about that, let's practice that skill we tried earlier. If it's an improper fraction where the top is bigger than the bottom, how many times does the bottom go into the top? And I know that 6 times 8 is 48, so we've got 8 big ones, and then there's 1 left over, so 1 over 6 would be my final answer. So just remember here, if you have a mixed number involved, big number times the bottom, then plus the top, so 3 times 2 is 6, plus your 1 is 7, 2 times 3 is 6, plus your 1 is 7, then this becomes over 2, this becomes over 3, and then you follow your normal process of multiplying, top times top, bottom times bottom, and then simplify. So let's now look at dividing these questions at the bottom here. When we're dividing fractions, we need to remember to use keep, flip, change. But actually, what we end up doing is keep, change, flip, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second. So the first thing you do is you keep the first fraction the same, so that will stay as 4 over 5. We flip, so our flip process is this second one here. We actually flip this part upside down. So instead of it being 1 over 2, it becomes 2 over 1. So you're just flipping the denominator to the numerator, numerator to the denominator. And then the last step is change. And what I mean by that is we change this sign from a divide to a times. And now we just go back to what we just did. We do top times top, bottom times bottom, and you end up with 8 over 5, which again, if we wanted to simplify, 5 goes into 8 once, with 3 over 5 left over. So that would be your final answer there. Okay, so let's now look at what happens with our mixed number. Again, if you want to pause the video and have a go at yourself, you can, but the first thing to do here is to turn it into an improper fraction again. So 6 times by 5, so big number times the bottom, and then add the top. So 6 times 5 is 30, plus your 4 is 34, So we've got 34 over 5, divided by 2 times 4 is 8, and then add the top there is 9. So it becomes 9 over 4. So the denominator stays the same. And now we go back through that process of KFC. So we keep the first fraction the same, which is 34 over 5. We flip the second one upside down, which ends up being 4 over 9. And we change the sign. So that's your flip. And we change the sign here from a divide to a times. So if you then do 34 times by 4, you can do 34 times 2, which is 68. And then you could double that to get 136. 5 times 9 is 45. So I end up with 136 over 45. And then think to yourself again, how many times does 45 go into 136? I know if you want to take your time over it, you can do 45, 90, add on another 45, I get 135. So I know it's 3 times. And then to get to 136, there's 1 left over out of 45. So my answer would be 3 and 1 over 45. Okay. If we then take a look at these ones at the bottom here, where we've got 5 over 8 plus 3. So the difference here is that we're now not working with 2 fractions. So if this situation comes up where you're asked to do 5 over 8 plus 3, so that's 3 whole ones, well, the first thing you do is just turn that into a fraction by putting it over 1. So that becomes 3 over 1, that becomes 5 over 1, that becomes 4 over 1, and that becomes 6 over 1. And then from that point, you just follow your process as normal. So if you want to pause the video now and have a go at these 4, you can. So you're practicing the adding, the multiplying, the dividing, and another multiplying one there. But if you want to have a go, do that now. Pause the video, have a go, and then I'll go through the answers for you. So these are the answers. So the first thing we need to do is make the denominator the same. So I'm going to times all this by 8. Times that by 8, times that by 8. That gives me 5 over 8 plus 24 over 8. Which ends up giving me 29 over 8. And then therefore turn that into an improper fraction. From an improper fraction to a mixed number. 8 goes into 24 3 times. 8 times 3 is 24. And then there's 5 left over. So 5 over 8. So that would be your answer. Here, because we've already put it over 1, top times top, bottom times bottom. Well, 6 times 5 is 30. 7 times 1 is 7. How many times is 7? Going to 30 is 4 times. And then there's 2 left over because 7 times 4 is 28. So it becomes 2 over 7 left over. So that's your final answer there. Here, we need to turn it, first of all, to an improper fraction on this side. So remember, do 9 times 2, which is 18. And then add your top there. So it becomes 19 over 2. We're doing that divided by 4 over 1. And then we go back to our process of keep, flip, change. So we keep this first one the same. It becomes 19 over 2. We flip the second one upside down to 1 over 4, and then we times. 19 times 1 is 19, because we're doing top times top. 2 times 4 is 8, so it becomes 19 over 8. And then you're looking at how many times does 8 go into 19, which is 2. 2 times 8 is 16, and 3 left over out of 8, so that would be your answer there. And the final one on our fractions work, we do 7 times 2, which is 14, and then add your top there, so it becomes 15 over 2 times by 6 over 1. So you're just doing top times top again, bottom times bottom. 15 times 6 is 90, and then 2 times 1 is 2. Basically 90 divided by 2 gives you 45, and technically you're saying there's no remainders because it goes exactly into it. And then that's your final answer. So in that video there, we've covered quite a lot. We've gone adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing with fractions. So anything you're not sure on, go back over, recheck it, just make sure you're happy with the key points, especially with going from a mixed number to an improper fraction and from an improper fraction to a mixed number. Hope you found it useful, and I'll see you all in the next video.